Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Dr. Nicola Dellinger. Dr. Nicola is a speaker and thought leader with 20 plus years of experience in the holistic wellness industry. Her passion is empowering people to take the most aligned steps to heal themselves. In addition to seeing patients, Dr. Nicola teaches a variety of classes as a renowned speaker and leads private and group retreats both locally and globally, all to take patients to their deeper healing. Dr. Nicola is the founder, of Pura Vida Healthcare, based in Durango, Colorado. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Nicola.
Oh, it's really my pleasure.
Yeah. So my first question is always trying to get just the backstory. What got you to where you are today?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to go back to kindergarten for that one because it's a brain podcast. And I remember for whatever reason, we were learning about Freud as a really small kid. And I just remember becoming fascinated about this idea that you could use people's dreams to help them heal. And so from a very young age, I wanted to go into psychiatry and brains and understanding all of that. And then there were all these different iterations of careers that I was playing with as a child too, but medicine really stuck for me. And so off I went to undergrad and was doing my pre-meds and studying the US healthcare system. And I was like, I can't do this. I didn't like my pre-med colleagues. They were really cutthroat. I was at a pretty competitive university. And then studying the healthcare system in the States was, in the 90s, I was like, this is like running to board the Titanic. And so I had a little meltdown at 19 and discovered naturopathic medicine through a friend of mine's mother, actually, who I was really close with. And she's like, you should talk to my doctor. He's totally different. And sure enough, he is a naturopath and had been for decades and talked to me about, really getting to the underlying cause of what's going on rather than just trying to medicate, be that with pharmaceutical, over the counter, or natural, just trying to get away from the symptoms. So that really resonated with me. And I went back from winter break and I dropped second semester organic chemistry and physics and picked up photography and Venezuelan short stories and just had a little bit more fun. And I've been exploring kind of the intersection between natural medicine and healing and psychology ever since.
I love that. So I've been stuck in that whole Western medicine world for 25 years, first as a nurse and then as a nurse practitioner. And in 2019, I got introduced to functional medicine, which
Mhm.
similar pathways to
Yep.
naturopathic, and I loved it. I started taking courses so that I could get certified in it. Ran out of money because it's not cheap, and you can't get
Mhm.
school loans like you can for regular medical degrees. So I
Correct.
had to take a break from it, but it's been fun having conversations with people on this podcast about different ways to get involved in functional and more naturopathic type of medicine without having the certification, because that why and the underlying what's going on rather than just medicating it to quiet it down,
Mhm.
really stuck out to me.
Yeah. And I think that we're craving that as practitioners, but also as patients in the system. Like, I think we're all wanting to understand and actually reconnect rather than always want to unplug from what's happening by just suppressing the symptoms. And so I'm super curious the evolution of medicine in general over the next few decades as we as providers become less satisfied and certainly as patients not getting the care that they are wanting and deserving. So I'm really kind of excited to see where, you know, the path leads us.
Yeah, yeah. I'm seeing more integrative health programs popping up left and right now, where that wasn't there before. So the need is definitely growing from both sides. So yeah, I think
Agreed.
you got on that ship at the right time, before it got cool to be on that ship. So yeah,
I've always liked to be at the head of the pack.
there you go. There you go. So this being a brain podcast, and I know you have many different conversations that you've had through the past. I looked at some of your previous interviews, and one thing that I focus on with this show is brain wellness, obviously in our mind. And you are said to embrace that whole power of the mind body with medicine. So what is mind body medicine? So you can kind of talk about just what that is, start with.
Yeah, it's a really great question. Because for me, this whole concept of mind and body ever having been separate is kind of a fallacy as far as I'm concerned. And so the idea is to not reconnect the mind and the body, but to remind us that they are interplaying all the time. And so this idea that your mind or your heart, because you got to talk about emotions, and we don't like to do that in general in our culture, let alone in medicine, how that might be actually influencing our physiology. So a big part of my job, as you know, the word doctor comes from the Latin docere, which is to teach. And so, a big part of my job is to educate people around how all of these different elements, physiology, psychology, emotions, are all playing and creating a big soup that we're living in, and really dictating our experience as a whole. And so, I was thinking about this a lot in preparing for talking with you today. And this idea that the brain, when something's wrong with our brain or our mind, be it mental health, or there's some sort of brain disease diagnosis or injury, that we get we double down into doing the things we're supposed to do. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't eat more protein and eat more fats and, kind of clean up the diet and work on the physiology and do supplements or medications as needed. But there's a missing piece here of the impact of getting a diagnosis or having an injury, and the emotional impact that is being created there. And so really my job is to help people bridge the physiology and the psychology to remember that they're all constantly influencing it. And if we don't address the constant chitter chatter in our mind, that's typically pretty self-critical for most of us humans, and if we don't address that, and if we don't address the fear and the pain and the anger or resentment or whatever we might be holding on to or experiencing based on our life situation, that those things actually have a huge impact on inflammatory pathways and hormone balance and neurotransmitter function. And so just to start really helping people understand their own selves as a whole system rather than accumulation of parts.
Yeah. I've actually had a couple people on the show that have had different diagnoses that got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome or chronic pain syndromes because of holding on to their stress. From a
Mhm.
provider side, how do you help somebody identify that this is your stress without saying, okay, this is what's going on? How do you delicately have that conversation and really get people thinking that what they're mentally experiencing can lead to some of those physical symptoms that they have?
Yeah, I would say there's kind of two pieces of that. One is just straight up physiology, like taking a moment to explain the full function of cortisol, for example. So, cortisol, as most of us know, is our stress hormone, but we forget that it's also our primary pathway of inflammation and inflammation regulation. So, if we think about hydrocortisone or corticosteroids, this sort of stuff, it's the big guns that we use when we want to decrease inflammation. Well, it's the same thing in just a physiological or a smaller dose in the body. And so understanding, first of all, that inflammation is not a bad thing. It's actually one of the most brilliant, complex things that our bodies can do. And so it's really looking at the factors that cause the body to not respond with a positive inflammatory reaction or to over respond with kind of a whole suppression kind of piece. And the key to that for me is cortisol, because cortisol has these two pathways, managing the fight or flight or managing inflammation. Well, evolutionarily, we are going to prefer cortisol to be going down that fight or flight pathway, because it doesn't matter if your knee hurts if you just got eaten by a tiger. So and I put it in those terms, people start moving out of like the guilt and shame and like the toughen up kind of attitude. I kind of just got to suck it up and push through. And they're moving. So it's a way to have like more logical compassion, I guess, or at least logical understanding of like, oh, this is not because I'm weak or because I just haven't been working hard enough. It's because there's actually physiology happening here. So that's the first thing to understand, is that these mechanisms in your body that are trying to regulate a healthy immune and inflammatory response are heavily influenced by the stress response, and they're going to steal the same raw materials. And so the easiest thing we can do to balance inflammation in the body is to look at being in relationship to the things that stress us differently. I try really hard not to use the phrase manage stress anymore because I get so many like talk about brain painful like eye rolls that are like deep back into the brain when it's like we just have to manage our stress, and it's like, yeah, no kidding, if I knew how to do that I would have taken care of that. I'm very aware that I'm drowning in stress and overwhelm, and so it's more like how do we acknowledge what's stressing us out, and then how do we shift our relationship to that, and we can talk a little bit more about that too. So that's the first thing, is just explaining the physiology. And then the second piece is just starting to ask questions about what was happening when the symptoms started coming on. How do you feel about dealing with this now? And then there's usually some emotions that come up there. And I'm like, well, it wasn't that hard to get to those emotions. Do you think it's possible that these stories or these emotions that keep on playing out in your system are having an impact, even though you're doing what you can to ignore them, distract from them, resist them, run away from them, all the fun things that we do to not be with those scary thoughts or feelings, that maybe they're playing in the undercurrent of our experience. And what would happen if we went all the way down and changed the undercurrent? What would that do to everything on top? And so it's a lot of questions. And some people, you can really see it. They're like, oh yeah, I feel that. And I think honestly, it's often not been acknowledged before. And they have maybe come to their provider, whatever kind of provider it might be, alternative, Western, whatever. And they've been bringing some of these things and they've been shut down. And so there's some self-judgment and hesitation to bring it back into the forefront as though it were a thing. Or it's been brought up and it's like, well, take an antidepressant. And, let's just move away from those feelings. And it's like, that's not necessarily the direction of health either. There's a time and a place, for sure. Those medications can be incredibly helpful, but it's a lot of times, I think the messaging behind take an antidepressant is let's just not feel that. And especially in a primary care office where there just isn't a lot of resources to really effectively deal with the big feels.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, it probably happens less in your office than in a traditional medical office, but do you still get pushback from some of those patients that they don't want to admit that those feelings might be a causative factor?
Absolutely. Yep. And so really my job is to meet somebody where they're at and to keep on, I was gonna say poking the bear, but that's not very kind, but like keep on just raising awareness and holding up a mirror and asking those questions. Because a lot of times, the mind often makes up a story that if I touch into these feelings, I am going to get tsunamied. I am going to get taken out of commission. I am going to be overwhelmed. I am never going to get off the couch again, or it's going to make me feel weak, or look weak or appear vulnerable. And so there's so many barriers that are really cultural and generational and, so many different messages that we get to not go there, that, everybody's on their own time frame. And so these are just questions you don't necessarily have to answer, but if you're listening, just start asking yourself a question like, is there, are there any feelings underneath this? Have I been paying any attention to that? What are the stories I'm making up about this situation, this diagnosis? And just start giving it a little bit more breathing room and see what comes out of that.
Mm-hmm. Good points. That kind of goes along with the next question that we kind of talked about, hinted to before we started recording. We were starting to think about and brainstorming what we wanted to talk about today. That whole idea of being versus doing too, because we're always doing so much that we're kind of hiding some of those symptoms. And I think I've mentioned, I've had a couple different people on here that we've talked about being a human being versus a human doing, and then another guest that talked about being a human becoming and not just a human being, because we're becoming the best version of ourselves. And in doing that, we have to identify those things that are causing us stress, whether it be physical, physiological, psychological, any of those. What's your take on all of that?
Yeah, such a great question. I think a lot of us use the doing as a way to get our underlying needs met. And what I mean by that is I'm going to do a good job over here and I'm going to get the praise from my partner or my boss or my friends or social media or whatever. I'm going to do the thing and I'm going to get some love. And I have to keep doing the things because I have to earn the love because I don't inherently believe that I'm enough to just not only be loved, but just be love. Like this is going into quantum physics a little bit, but if we talk about the smallest measurement that we know of is a quantum, right? So and so what is a quantum? Do you actually know like what it's a measurement of? So it's a measurement of light. And that's the smallest measurement that we have at this point, and the smallest, it's not quite a particle, but the smallest unit that we measure in. And I'm like, okay, so if the quantum is the smallest unit and it's light, well, what is light? Where does that come from? And that for me is where we cross into the spiritual, because I'm like, it's the divine, whatever you conceive the divine to be, God, the universe, spirit, whatever resonates for you. And so for me, I'm like, okay, so at our core, at the very, very, smaller than electrons and protons, at the base of our cellular structure is light. And that just is. It's the same for my teacup. It's the same for my eyelashes. It's the same for my heart. And so if we can remember that at the core, we already are divine. We already are a facet of this universal light. And that if we can allow ourselves to relax into that a little bit and allow ourselves to have that knowing, that is what allows us to be more of ourselves and to get out of some of these performance patterns of pushing through, working harder, efforting, and these are the things that are keeping us sick, even when, again, we've been diagnosed with something. Then it's like we're doubling down on that doing pattern. It's like, I got to do this, I got to do this. And I've got some patients where I'm like, I think that we should not have any more appointments because you've got so many appointments. It's fatiguing to tell your story, to get transportation or go to these places, to navigate the opinions of providers that you trust, let alone Dr. Google. I mean, this is a lot of information to process. And if you're talking about people who are working with brain health, that's really, really fatiguing the organ you're actually trying to support. And so what happens if we breathe some of that energy from the head into the heart? What if we just breathe in and breathe out just to make some more room for all the possibilities, for the fears, for the emotions, for the thoughts, and just notice what happens when you take some time to breathe with all that's here without jumping into responding. I don't know if you have kids. I've got a 14-year-old. And if he's having a moment and I jump in with, well, have you done this? Or did you think about talking to your teacher? Or what about blah, 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 blah? He's like, Mom, like, what is your problem? But if I say, wow, it feels like you really had a hard time, or it feels like that was a really, difficult moment for you and this friend, he'll be like, yeah, it was. And we both get really quiet. And then in a few moments, he goes, well, what do you think I should do? And there we go. So we're being first, we're being with what's up, right? Oh, his feelings got hurt. That was, or he didn't know what to do or whatever. So I'm acknowledging and presencing his feelings. And then we're just making a little space for it. And then typically I try to either wait for him to say, what do you think I should do? Or I'll ask, do you want some advice? And sometimes he'll say yes, and sometimes he'll say no. But that in all of my relationships has really shifted things. And it's awkward at first. And this is something we play with on retreats a lot is one person talks and the other person just nods and maybe says thank you for what they're hearing, but they don't ask questions, they don't ask for more details. And at first it's kind of awkward, but after we play with this for about 20 minutes or so, people's experiences are like, oh, it was such a relief to not have to come up with all the answers and not have something brilliant to say. And for the person who is speaking, they feel really seen and heard, and they felt loved and taken care of, even though there were no solutions being offered. So I think we've all been caught up in a collective brainwashing of, we have to do in order to be valuable and in order to be successful, when really what we're seeking from each other and certainly ourselves is more space to listen and to be with.
Mm-hmm. I think if we can get past that whole stigma of mental health things, when we go to a mental health provider, they're really good at asking questions like that. Like,
Mhm.
how do you feel about that information before they want to know what to do about it? And I've actually taken that to, yeah, I've got the kids at home too. We've got teenagers, and
Okay.
I've every once in a while I can catch myself and I'll ask the kids, well, how did you feel about that before I ask them the next steps about what should we do about it?
Mhm.
And it is a very different response that you get, whether you're in the patient seat or you're asking somebody else that, because
Mhm.
you feel that connection on a different level.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're putting each other at ease because you're like, my heart's open and I'm here, I'm listening. And we don't get that very much anymore. There's a lot of talking, there's a lot of noise in our, cultural sphere, but there's not a lot of listening and presence and going, yeah, I get that.
Mhm.
Or just even sharing what's going on and have someone not go, oh my God, are you okay? It's like, it's like, oh wow, that sounds hard,
Yeah,
or how was that for you? Oh, that
yeah.
really, why is that important? Or, all of these kind of really broad, open-ended questions that we can ask each other, but we can definitely start by asking ourselves
Mhm.
because we can only go far in relationship with another as we've gone with ourselves. And that's true for practitioners. We can only take our people as far as we're willing to go on our own. And the wounded healer archetype is alive and well. So, we know that. But then that's certainly true in relationships, personal relationships too, is how much compassion and understanding and space do you have for yourself in all of your iterations and finer moments and ugly moments and, patterns and habits and neuroses that PS we all have that we just really try hard to cover up and not admit. And again, social media has really helped that persona of everything shiny and new and bright, and there's nothing going on. So I think that's actually like deepened our shame and our holding back and the stigma of like I'm actually suffering
Mhm.
or I should be grateful, but I'm looking out the window at some of the golden leaves that are in the trees, in this fall and I'm like I should be grateful. I could just appreciate this change of the season and the 70-degree weather and it's like but I'm feeling this. And so if we just have some more room for it, it's kind of like watching the clouds go by. It can become a practice like that where we're just watching things evolve and change, but we're not having to get attached and mired in it. And the more we are practicing accessing and presencing our emotions, then the easier it is to lay on the grass and just watch them go by. We never try to grab the cloud or slow down how fast it's moving through, but it does move through. And emotions, I promise you, are the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so again, before we hit record on the show, I was telling you about how I myself had a traumatic brain injury a year and a half ago, and I was always that person that was on the go all the time. I worked a full-time job and then some, and I was proud of myself for how hard I could work. And I never really knew how to relax and how to just take it easy and how to be. It
Mhm.
was always a doing thing. And since that time frame, I've identified that whenever I do get back to work as a practitioner, I don't want to work as hard as I did because that wasn't a fulfilling way to go. And I really like sitting by the campfire in the backyard when we can light that fire and just sit there and watch the fire dance because that is so relaxing. You actually do have that sense of peace that most of us are looking for in our lives, and we just don't take the time to find it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I think is so neat about, where we're living in the scientific age is that there's a boatload of research that shows you're changing your actual brainwave activity by watching a fire very specifically. And that when you're breathing into your belly, you're activating the diaphragm, which stimulates the vagus nerve, which is the main part of your parasympathetic. And that there's actually 5 times as many nerve fibers from your vagus nerve going to your brain than there is from the brain to your rest of your body. So taking a deep breath, it's not just a nicety. There's actually room to change your physiology by starting to breathe into that diaphragm and tell your brain that you're safe. So these practice, and humming and chanting and singing, same thing. There's little nerve branches of the vagus nerve that innervate the soft palate and the back of the tongue and the inner ear. So when we do these spiritual practices that we find cross-culturally, oh, there's some physiology behind that. And so that's really what is so fun is to kind of take what you love doing already and then look at like, oh, there's actually physiological benefit to this. It's not just like I'm slacking. It's, oh, I'm remodeling my nervous system. So if you're someone who really needs that sort of like, I'm still doing something as I'm sitting by the fire, just letting myself zone out, I'm actually remodeling my brain waves right now. And so we can have both, especially as we still want the training wheels of the doing in the mind. Most of us can't just jump out of that habit and feel like, da, 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 like I don't have any issues. It's like, woo, there's all this fear and shame and all these things to work through as we step into a life that we know will be more fulfilling. But there's a lot of stories that we get to look at and unwind and embrace and integrate. And then that allows those stories to dissolve. But if the boogeyman's in the closet and we never open the closet door, we're going to be living in fear of that boogeyman forever. And the boogeyman has the fear in us not wanting to look.
Mhm.
As soon as we open that closet door or we look under the bed, it's like that would be the most boring horror movie ever. If the girl like didn't hide in the closet, she just opened the door. She's like, "Come on, Jason, come get me," kind of thing, right? It would be a terrible horror movie because the power is in the suspense, is in the not looking. And so when we choose to stop and stand and face whatever it is that's here, all of a sudden that power that it's had over us drops out. I'm not saying it's always easy,
Mhm.
but you have the resources within you already to be with this, and that's all that's required. It's like, well, if I look at it, I don't know what to do with it, right? So that's going to be the big thing. It's like I'm going to look at these emotions, and then the brain's going to kick in. It's like, oh, what if I didn't have to do anything? What if I just, like a little kid who's having a tantrum on the floor, it's like, I'm just going to be here, make sure you're not going to break yourself or other objects, but I'm going to be here, and I'm just going to be with you until you feel better. Or I'm going to show up and rub your back, and I hear you. Yeah, that really hurt. Yeah, you got a big old boo-boo on your knee. Like, okay, like there's not much we can do, but we can show up. And that's how we start healing ourselves from trauma and unresolved emotions and self-criticism patterns.
Mhm. Mhm. And I know you like to say that symptoms are telling us things too. So all of these symptom patterns that we get are
Mhm.
telling us things. How do we know what to listen to? How do we know that it's not just this silly fear of the boogeyman that's there versus something that's real?
Yeah. Well, I think we listen to all of it, right? I think that's how we start determining what's real. And a question that I have is that can be helpful is this true? So I have this fear that, I don't know, I'm trying to make something up real quick. I can never do this on the spot. I'm terrible at this. So yeah, I have this fear that if I go to the doctor, they're going to give me a diagnosis. So I just haven't been going to the doctor. It's probably a pretty common one, right? And it's like, okay, well, let's look at this. If I go to the doctor, is it true that I'm going to get a diagnosis? Maybe so, maybe not, right? Is it true that avoiding getting a diagnosis is going to make this less real? Not. So we just get to start walking through with some lightness, with ourselves, not like, oh, you're such an idiot. Like, not getting diagnosed is not going to make this go away. It's more like, oh, I see this fear and I can be the adult in the room with all these little kid parts. I work with internal family systems, so we talk a lot about parts of us. And so we can start showing up for those little kid parts that are holding onto these fears, and we can listen and we can maybe help unravel those fears. We can maybe provide some comfort during those scary times. Or we can tell those little kid parts, like, why don't you stay home and play and I'll go to the doctor and find out what's going on. Right. So there's that piece. And then as far as, your symptoms, any symptoms that you have are a divine messenger. I promise you that everything that's going on in your body is your body's very wise way of trying to get your attention. Something is out of balance. And we will co-create scenarios, and this is a tricky area, right? Like, did you co-create your car accident so that you could change your life? I mean, there is an aspect of that where there was this huge gift available for you. Is it your fault? No, that's not. Did you want it? No, absolutely not. But was there a vibrational signal that was going out there in the world that said, I know I need to make some pretty major changes and I'm scared. and then we create or co-create, an incident or something, an event that really pushes that envelope to make us stop and reevaluate what we're doing. And so a lot of times when our body, again, on that physical, mental, or emotional level is expressing symptoms, the first impulse we have is make it stop. I don't like it. It's uncomfortable or it hurts. It may actually physically hurt quite a bit. And so we want to make it go away rather than dropping into what does my body need right now? If we're talking about a brain injury, my body needs more rest. My body needs different types of food. My body needs more quiet. My body needs limited activity. There's all these things. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to really listen to my body. And when we have pain, most of us do a pretty good job of tending to that. We do what we can to push through. We might pop a bunch of ibuprofen. Fine, so be it. And some days that's what we need to do. But a lot of times that those symptoms are really a call to wake up, to like, oh, you know what? This job, I was working too much, or I was, overextended, or I wasn't getting compensated well, or this relationship is really stressful and I've just been letting it go on, or I don't like where I live, or whatever. I'm a morning person and I'm working the night shift. I mean, there could be, 70,000 things that could be going on, but your body is always working for you. And I think that's the thing that happens, especially when, again, we have an event or a diagnosis come on, the trust between ourselves and our body gets ruptured. And so we think that our body's out to get us. We're angry with our body. We want to detach and numb out from our body. And I get that. That's a really normal response. And what would happen if today you start plugging back in? And it might just be a little bit, and you might not always be in a position to do what the whisper of your body is wanting, but you can be in relationship with your body. Like, hey, body, I get it. You need some more time to heal. Or, hey, body, I get it. You're feeling out of balance, and we're going to start, figuring out how we can feel more aligned. But even just having the conversation with you and your body of that's coming from a more nurturing, collaborative place rather than like, fist in the air, screw you, body, I'll show you, kind of thing, which is where a lot of us can get to because it's hard and it can feel like a slog. So I get it. And then we show up with compassion for those moments where we've just been hard on ourselves or hard on our body or whatever. Like it's all on the table. It's all okay. Like none of it is better or worse than the other. And so this is the practice is how do I look myself in the eye and go, oof, I was really hard on myself yesterday. What am I choosing today? Like, why was I hard on myself? Well, I feel it because I've been told that this is my fault, especially with mental health and I should just work harder to get over it. Can't I just take a pill or go to therapy and just move through this? Why am I feeling this way? We could start feeling so broken. And I'm here to tell you, you are not broken. And therefore, whatever's happening doesn't necessarily need to be fixed. It doesn't mean that we ignore it, but we don't have to work so hard at changing it. What would happen if we relaxed a little and started just being with what's here? How would that potentially change your symptoms, change your physiology, change your cellular structure, change how your nerves are talking to each other? I mean, the possibilities are endless. Change how you digest food, because that's a parasympathetic nervous system activity. So if we're stressed out all the time, we're not receiving the nutrition from the amazing food that we're putting in our bodies. So there's, all of these things where if we're miserable about eating a kale and chicken salad and we're just, just grunting through every bite of it, because what we really want is a ham cheeseburger and fries. It's like that kale and chicken salad is not going to do the trick for you. Go get the burger. It's fine. You're going to be okay.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with what part of what you said there with that people want a fix.
Yeah.
It's always I think a lot of times I'd have patients come into the office and what can we do to make this go away? What can we do to stop this? How can we fix this? And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I think in society, we've made it really easy for people to just walk in and want a pill to
Mhm.
correct whatever it is, because that's
Mhm.
a whole lot easier than tackling those mental issues or the psychosocial issues or whatever demons we have hiding behind that door that we need to potentially talk about and maybe get more comfortable with those rather than just trying to fix them and make them go away.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I always laugh because like in newer cars, there's like you can have hot seats or cold seats, and your vent can be on 70 and mine can be on 62, and we can listen to different music, and we can have totally different experiences sitting next to each other in the same flipping car. It's just our tolerance is very, very small these days. Our tolerance for discomfort. I was talking with my son about, it used to be just there was like 6 channels, and you had to get home right after school, otherwise you missed the cartoons, and that was it. And he was like, I don't even understand what you're saying. I watch whatever cartoon I want, whatever I want. So we have become a very convenience-based society where we want what we want when we want it. And your body, your symptoms are trying to call you into something higher. Even if the mind is like, nope, this is my path. Your body, your heart is going, maybe so, maybe not. Let's check out what's over here. You're being called to evolve. And that's what the gift is from my point of view. And again, when people are having pain and suffering and discomfort, it gets into tricky waters to say that there's a gift here, because it doesn't always feel that way. But if we're able to back up just a little and go, what is the gift here that I'm not seeing? And maybe you ask yourself that for every day for months and months until you're like, oh, this has created more time at home, or this has made me shift my business, or this has brought me closer to this person or further away from that person. All these relationships shift and change as we're navigating things. And it's like, oh, that person fell out of my life, but they were kind of a drain. And this person really has stepped up and we weren't even that close. Or, so all of a sudden it's like, okay, there are some things happening here that are for me. And that's another phrase I will often encourage my clients to play with is, this is happening for me, not to me. And that can be a huge, huge mindset shift as we're trying to move out of that fix me mentality. Because inherently, when we come to be fixed, we are giving ourselves a message that we are broken. And we are continuing to play in that. And especially the more desperate we get, if this med didn't work or that treatment didn't work, and it works for 80% of the people, but didn't work for you. And I see this all the time. Like, oh, that is a really hard obstacle to get up and over. It's like, whoa, I'm even more broken than 80% of the people that are dealing with this thing. It's like, hang on a second, maybe it's just not your path. Maybe that's just not how you're going to heal. Let's find out how you're going to heal. And that's part of what I love about being an naturopathic doctor is that I'm much less protocol based and much, able to sit with people and talk like, what's happening for you as an individual and how are we going to navigate this for you? And I think that's the thing, is to not compare stories, and maybe take some of that information and, oh, it worked for Joey, so maybe it'll work for me. And it's like, you know what? Joey seems like they're doing really well. Is this a fit for me right now? You know what? Major dietary changes just feel really stressful for me right now. And I think it's great that they went keto and they're doing awesome, but that's not a fit for me right now. Maybe I'll play with that at another time. So we don't need to make Joey wrong for going keto and having an experience, but we don't need to make ourselves wrong either for not choosing that if it's not aligned.
Mhm. Mhm. It's not a one size fits all approach.
That's exactly right. Ever. Your body is nobody else has your body.
Yep.
And nobody else has your experience, your history, all of it. So honor that you are you and there's nobody else like you. And you're here to share your unique gift. That is the point. And so all of these, stressors and beliefs and emotions, they're covering up like kind of like, layers of clouds over the sun. It's like, it's still there, but we can't feel it the same way as if it's a cloudless day. So
Yeah.
take some time to let the clouds peel back.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of time, how much time do you spend with your patients? Because I can imagine that this would take a really long time to really kind of peel back some of those layers and figure out what you're dealing with.
Yeah. So my initial visits, I say it's an hour and a half, but to be totally honest, sometimes it slips over into 2 hours. Because the people's story is such an important part. I can't possibly put a treatment plan together without understanding the gestalt of you as a whole person. So if you're coming to me with, a brain injury, yes, I want to talk about all of that. And I want to talk about hormones and sleep and digestion and all of these different pieces that are going to be playing into your personal recovery. And then my follow-ups typically are anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, depending on what we're doing. So if we're diving into some of the mind body work, I'll usually do an hour and a half because that way we can do kind of a more quote unquote medical check-in.
Mhm.
And then again, here's that duality and that separation, which I'm trying to come up with. I need new words. So Mandy, if you got any new words, I would love to have a whole new vernacular for what we're talking about here. But so we do the more medical check-in, and then we're going to move into some of the more mind-body based work.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That still doesn't seem like nearly enough time to peel back all of those layers. Wow.
What's neat though is that, one of the tenets of naturopathic medicine is this idea of the vis medicatrix naturae. And so that's the healing power of nature. And so that's the force, if you will, that lives within each of us as in any living being, be it a plant or an animal or whatever. And the idea here is that your being wants to naturally return to homeostasis.
Mhm.
And so if you think about those like Bobo punching bag dolls that had the sand on the bottom, the idea is you punch the doll and it gets back up, and you punch the doll and it gets back up. Well, a lot of and that's how we're supposed to be. But a lot of times, if somebody's standing on the neck of the Bobo doll, it can't get back up. And so we have to find out what's what we call the obstacle to cure. And so with the least amount of intervention, how do we stimulate the vis within your body so that it starts to operate to bring itself back towards homeostasis? So yes, these are big concepts to play with, but I'm really implanting seeds for people. And the connection, it's, sometimes in therapy, the relationship between the therapist and the client is so important. As part of what I like about the IFS work is there's this concept of self energy, and so the point of that therapeutic modality is to connect the client more with themselves. And that's between the knowledge of the vis and then the connection with the self energy with a capital S. What I'm really trying to do is awaken and reestablish tools and resources within the patient's own person
Mhm.
rather than be so reliant on my education of supplements and herbs and homeopathy. We might use some of those tools in order to stimulate the vis, but the idea is for them never to become reliant on those external supports or me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Great plan. Great plan on that. I think we could probably go on all day long, but for sake of time, let's kind of wrap up a little bit. Do you have any upcoming events or projects that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the winter of 2025, I'm going to have two different 6-week programs. One is called Awaken, which is really, or maybe Awaken and Heal. I haven't decided yet. But the idea is just to dive a little bit more into symptoms as messengers and how do we be with it and how do we translate those messages from the body into something that we can come into more harmony with our bodies, no matter what is presenting. And the other is called Making Peace. And that's a 6-week program for anxiety, overwhelm, stress, and just some pretty practical tools, again, going physiological all the way into the spiritual realm around like all these different aspects of anxiety that, how do we start to shift that pattern and let it go. We don't need to have that anymore. And then in June of 2025, I'm hosting a women's retreat to help awaken the divine feminine. And ongoing, I've got a monthly membership, Foundations in Health. So you can just hop in and ask any questions you want. It's pretty open forum kind of thing. We have themes for each month, but nothing that if you have another question, it's always welcome.
Very cool. Very cool. Where can people find you if they want to learn about any of these programs?
Yeah, so my website is Pura, Pura, Vida, Vida, healthcare.com. And you can also get in touch with me directly through that website if you are interested. I always offer free 15-minute consults if you want to chat a little bit more about how we might work together.
Awesome. And I think I saw that you're on some of the social medias as well. So I will
Yep.
include those links in the show notes so that people can find you any way that they need to. And then any last words you'd like to share with listeners before we wrap up today?
I can't say this enough, but I want you to hear again, you are not broken. We're not broken. What is happening to you is happening for a reason, and it is a call to expand into what's next. And so don't put your head down, lift it up. You've got what you need to face this. I promise. Yeah.
Awesome. Great words to end on. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for your time. It was so fun.
Yeah.